My name is Adrienne Cole, 36 years old. They say routine is supposed to anchor you, but mine felt more like quicksand, dragging me down day after day. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, soft gold across the hardwood floor, but the warmth never reached me. I was hunched over my laptop, typing numbers into a QuickBooks report, when the front door opened without warning. The familiar squeak of the hinge wasn't comforting. It was invasive. Sylvia. She stepped into my home as though it were hers, perfume preceding her like a storm cloud. Heady, floral, suffocating. She carried herself like royalty in exile, silk blouse tucked into a pencil skirt that didn't crease even when she sat down. She didn't bother asking if she could come in. She didn't need to. She had the spare key I had begged Connor to take back months ago. Adrienne, she announced, voice smooth but edged with judgment. A woman your age should be preparing for motherhood, not spreadsheets. She set her oversized leather bag on the counter and looked around, scanning the house like an inspector sent to catalog my failures. I swallowed hard. Good morning, Sylvia. To what do I owe the honor? You know why, she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I had brewed for myself. She didn't ask. She never did. I'm worried. Without a baby, who inherits the company? Her eyes darted toward the framed wedding photo on the mantel. Connor and I smiling, naive, standing in front of the church with confetti still in our hair. 8 years ago, before the weight of Sylvia's expectations had lodged itself into every corner of our marriage. The Blake family line ends here, Adrienne, she sighed, as though pronouncing a death sentence. I clenched my jaw, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. Connor's the only heir. That's your answer. Her gaze narrowed. That's not enough. A legacy can't survive on good intentions. Mason built something from nothing. Do you want to be the one who lets it die? I stared at her, throat tight. This was how every conversation with her ended, with me cast as the failure, the obstruction, the barren placeholder in her dynasty fantasy. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, I said, standing. Feel free to lock up when you leave. She didn't budge. Instead, she leaned back in the chair and crossed her legs slowly, deliberately. 8 years, Adrienne. 8 years of marriage, and nothing to show for it. Are you even trying anymore? The words sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. What she didn't know, what she didn't care to know, was how many nights Connor and I had tried. How many tears I had swallowed, lying on cold examination tables under fluorescent lights, counting ceiling tiles, while doctors used words like low chance, failed cycle, and unlikely. We had tried, we had failed, and somewhere along the line, we stopped hoping. That night, Connor came home late again. First, it had been once a week, then twice. Now it was nearly every night. His excuses had become rehearsed. Client dinner, he muttered, shrugging off his coat. He kissed me on the cheek like I was a distant relative, not his wife. Dinner's on the table, I said carefully. He didn't even glance at the plates. Already ate. Burger with the guys. You don't like burgers, I said, half accusation, half plea. He didn't answer, just walked upstairs, the sound of his footsteps hollow on the stairs. I sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched roast chicken I had spent hours preparing. The silence was deafening. Later, when I suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, maybe the mountains, maybe the coast, he sighed like I had asked him to run a marathon. Maybe if you gave my mom less attitude, he muttered, pulling his phone from his pocket, and me more attention, we wouldn't have this problem. My chest tightened like I had slammed into glass. What problem? I whispered. He didn't answer. He just walked upstairs and closed the bedroom door. I sat there, frozen, the glow from my phone screen illuminating the tears I didn't want to admit were falling. The next morning, the envelope appeared on the counter, not addressed to me, but open, as if mocking my curiosity. Coastal Credit and Finance. My breath caught as I scanned the page, outstanding balance, $14,762.54. Cartier bracelet, Spa World Platinum membership, Louis Vuitton. My name wasn't on the bill, but our address was. That night, when he came home, I asked nothing. I just smiled tightly and excused myself to bed early. When I was sure he was asleep, I slipped back downstairs and dug through the trash. Shredded receipts, ripped neatly into strips. I taped them back together on the counter like evidence at a crime scene. A $900 silk robe, a couple's massage. Perfume. Jasmine. Expensive. perfume I didn't own. I held the paper in trembling hands, the jasmine ghosting my nose even though it wasn't there. I thought of Sylvia's words. 8 years. Nothing to show for it. Was this what Connor thought he deserved? That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, turning in slow, hypnotic circles. The house felt like a stranger's, foreign, hostile. And somewhere in the hollow silence, a truth settled like lead in my chest. My marriage was not just faltering, it was rotting. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I began watching, quietly, checking mileage on the car, taking photos of receipts, saving bank statements. Each act felt like treason, but I told myself it was protection. Protection for the day when I would no longer be able to deny what I already knew. Because deep down I sensed something, someone, was waiting to rip the last thread of my marriage apart. And they were closer than I dared to imagine. The bills kept coming, each one a nail in the coffin of my denial. I pretended not to notice when Connor shoved envelopes into his briefcase before I could glance at them. I told myself maybe it was business expenses, fuel, client dinners, hotel stays. But then I'd smell jasmine on his shirts again, faint but undeniable, a scent that didn't belong to me. I hadn't worn perfume in months. I had stopped buying it altogether when money became tight after another round of failed treatments. At first, I excused it. Maybe it was a client brushing past him, or a secretary spraying the air with something floral. But the receipts told another story, and receipts don't lie. I became a ghost in my own home, moving silently, watching carefully. I checked the mileage on his car after he claimed he was at the office. The numbers never matched. He said he was in Midtown, but the odometer showed nearly twice the distance. When he showered, I checked his jacket pockets. Sometimes I found nothing. Other times I found ticket stubs, folded napkins with lipstick stains, and once a hotel key card slipped into a side pocket like an afterthought. The card was stamped with the logo of a downtown plaza hotel, the kind of place we never stayed because it was too polished, too expensive. I didn't confront him, not because I was weak, but because I wasn't ready for the truth to leave the shadows. A truth whispered is easier to live with than a truth spoken aloud. Still, I couldn't escape the memories of who we used to be. There were nights early in our marriage when Connor would pull me onto the couch, movies playing in the background while we whispered about our dreams. He wanted to expand his father's logistics firm, maybe open branches in 3 more states. I wanted to travel, to see Paris, to eat croissants in a cafe where no one knew our names. We had been partners once, lovers, friends, conspirators, the kind of couple people envied. Now, when I looked at him, I saw a stranger. And worse, I saw my reflection in his indifference, smaller, dimmer, erased. One Friday evening, I decided to test him. I dressed up, not over the top, just enough to remind him of who I was. A navy dress, soft curls pinned back, heels I hadn't worn in years. I even dabbed on a bit of perfume, lavender, not jasmine. When he walked in, his eyes skimmed over me like I was another piece of furniture. "You look nice," he said flatly, loosening his tie. "Dinner's ready," I offered. "I already ate," he muttered. Something inside me snapped. "With who?" He froze, then shrugged. "Clients, you wouldn't know them." Try me," I pressed, forcing my voice steady. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Adrienne, why are you always so suspicious? Can't I just have dinner without being interrogated?" My throat tightened. "Can't I just have a husband who comes home hungry?" His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. He disappeared upstairs, door closing like a final word. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the kitchen floor. I wasn't drunk, but I wanted to be. I wanted the numbness, the blur. Instead, I sat there staring at the receipts I had collected, spread out before me like a puzzle with missing pieces. I snapped photos of each one, saved them in a hidden folder on my laptop labeled work. I told myself I was building a case, but what case? Who was the judge? Who was the jury? The loneliness was unbearable. I started leaving the TV on at night, just to drown out the silence. I scrolled through old photos, vacations, anniversaries, birthdays. In every picture, we looked like a couple in sync. And maybe we were, back then. Before Sylvia's voice grew louder than mine, before infertility hollowed me out, before secrets filled the space between us. Weeks blurred into one another, heavy with suspicion, until one night, everything shattered. It was 2:34 a.m. The ringtone jolted me awake, piercing through the dark. Connor's phone buzzed on his nightstand. I reached for it instinctively, my hand trembling. He wasn't home. He had told me earlier that evening he was in Cleveland, helping with a warehouse audit. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. But something inside me, fear, dread, instinct, made me swipe to answer. "Hello?" My voice cracked, thick with sleep. The voice on the other end was frantic, high-pitched. A woman. Are you Connor's wife?" she asked breathlessly. My pulse spiked. "Yes, who is this?" "Oh, God," she sobbed. "He collapsed. At the hotel. The downtown plaza. They're taking him to St. Luke's Hospital. It's his heart. Please. He's critical." My mouth went dry. "What did you just—" But the line went dead. I sat frozen for a split second, the phone still pressed to my ear, the silence ringing louder than the call itself. Then I moved on instinct. Jeans over my pajamas, sweater thrown on backward, then fixed with shaking hands, keys in my grip so tight the metal cut into my palm. The drive blurred past, headlights slicing through empty streets. My heart hammered so violently I thought I'd pass out at the wheel. Every red light felt like punishment. Every minute stretched like a lifetime. By the time I reached the hospital, my knuckles were white from clenching the steering wheel. The automatic doors slid open, the sterile scent of bleach and metal hitting me like a wall. I stumbled to the front desk, voice barely working. "Connor Blake, my husband. He was brought in." The nurse glanced at her screen, then back at me with the kind of expression that people use when they've said the same words too many times. "Cardiac wing, room 412. They stabilized him, but you'll want to prepare yourself." "Prepare myself for what?" I asked, but my voice was a whisper. She didn't answer. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Each step felt heavier, slower, like the air itself was thick with dread. And then I saw her. A woman standing just outside room 412. Tall, blonde, slender, trembling. She clutched a designer handbag to her chest like a lifeline. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her black dress screamed money. Her heels screamed vanity. But her face, wrecked, tear-stained, desperate, was all too human. When her eyes met mine, she stiffened. You must be Adrienne," she whispered. Her voice cracked on my name. I stopped a few feet away, heart pounding so hard I thought the sterile walls might echo it back. "Who are you?" I demanded. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking. "I'm Harper. Connor and I. We were supposed to get married." I stood frozen, staring at the trembling young woman in front of me. Harper. Her name slid into the sterile air like a shard of glass. "Married?" I repeated, though my throat felt raw. "You said married?" Her lips trembled. "Yes, Connor told me we'd be engaged by summer. He said the paperwork was complicated because of you, but—" Her voice cracked. "We were planning a life together." For a moment, the hallway seemed to tilt, as though the ground had shifted beneath me. I gripped the wall to steady myself. The beeping monitors behind the closed door pulsed faintly, a cruel reminder of why we were here. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of that hospital, to shake her until the words shattered into something I could dismiss as lies. But her eyes, wet, wide, shimmering with something like grief, told me she believed every syllable. The door swung open. A nurse stepped out, glanced between us, and said softly, "Family only." Before I could move, Harper stepped forward. "I am family," she whispered. My breath caught. "No," I said sharply, "you're not." The nurse looked confused, caught between us. Then she simply gestured toward the chairs against the wall. "Wait here. The doctor will speak with you both." Both. I sank into a chair, my pulse a roar in my ears. Harper clutched her handbag tighter, pacing the length of the hallway like a widow waiting for the verdict. She glanced at me now and then, but I refused to look back. When the elevator dinged, my stomach knotted. Sylvia stormed out, Mason trailing behind her like a weary shadow. The familiar cloud of her perfume reached me before she did. "Where is he?" she demanded, her heels clicking against the tile. I pointed silently toward the door. She pushed past me, barging inside. A moment later, her gasp echoed down the hall. Mason followed quietly, his shoulders hunched. I waited for her to reemerge, for the inevitable interrogation. Instead, what I heard was worse. "Oh my God," Sylvia's voice trembled. "You must be Harper." I snapped my head around. Sylvia stood in the doorway, eyes wide as she looked at the young woman. Not in shock, not in confusion, but in recognition. Harper nodded slowly, lips quivering. Yes, I'm Harper. I shot to my feet. You know her? My voice rang down the corridor. Sylvia didn't look at me. She stepped closer to Harper, her eyes shimmering in a way they never did for me. You're here, Sylvia whispered, her voice breaking. Thank God. I was so afraid it was too late. Harper's mascara-streaked face collapsed, and she crumpled into Sylvia's arms as though they'd rehearsed it. My chest constricted, air strangling in my lungs. What is going on? I demanded. Sylvia turned, her expression sharp, her hand protectively over Harper's shoulder. Adrienne, she said, her voice cutting. This is Harper. She's carrying Connor's child. The words detonated inside me. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. The hallway, the monitors, even my own pulse. What? I choked out. Harper's hands trembled over her stomach, fingers splayed as if cradling something invisible. I'm pregnant, she whispered, her eyes glistening. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. Pregnant. The word tore me open like a blade. 8 years of failure, of tears on clinic floors, of empty cradles and negative tests. And now this stranger, this intruder, stood before me, claiming to carry the one thing I had prayed for. Sylvia's reaction gutted me more than Harper's announcement. She didn't rage. She didn't slap Harper or throw her out. Instead, she pulled her tighter, rocking her gently as if she were a daughter she had been waiting for all along. Oh, thank God, Sylvia whispered, tears spilling. I thought our bloodline ended with him. You have no idea how long I've prayed for this. I stared at them, disbelief curdling into rage. You prayed for her? For this? My voice cracked, raw with betrayal. While I spent years bleeding and breaking myself apart for your son? Sylvia didn't answer. Mason finally stepped out of the room, his face ashen, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Inside, he murmured. It's time. We filed into the room in silence. Connor lay pale against the sheets, oxygen mask hissing, machines beeping with a steady rhythm that felt borrowed, temporary. His skin was gray, his lips tinged blue. I approached slowly, gripping the bedrail. Connor, I whispered, but his eyes never opened. The doctor appeared, voice steady, rehearsed. It was a massive heart attack. We stabilized him, but the damage is severe. He'll need constant monitoring. I can't promise how long. The rest blurred, words like damage, critical, unlikely. None of them landed. I sat at his bedside, my hand on his, cold and limp. Memories flashed. His laugh in our first apartment, his arms wrapped around me in the rain, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. And then Harper's voice cut through the haze. Can I sit with him? I turned slowly. She stood behind Sylvia, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. No, I hissed. Sylvia's eyes flashed. She has every right. I opened my mouth, but no words came. 2 days later, Connor was gone. Just like that. He never woke up, never spoke another word to me, never explained, never confessed, never apologized. His chest simply stopped rising in the middle of the night. Sylvia wailed. Harper collapsed dramatically into a chair, sobbing. Mason rubbed his face in silence. And me? I stood there empty. The man I had loved for 8 years had been living a double life, and now not only was I left with the wreckage, I was expected to share my grief with the woman carrying his so-called legacy. Because, as Sylvia would soon remind me, Harper wasn't just a mistress. She was family now. The funeral home smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, a place where grief was staged like theater. I sat at the long table in the family planning room, my black dress still smelling faintly of starch. Across from me, Sylvia perched with perfect posture, her grief painted into fine lines of disapproval rather than tears. Mason sat beside her, shoulders slumped, staring at the pattern of the carpet as though it might swallow him whole. Between us lay the final arrangements, the casket, the flowers, the seating. Details that should have been mine to decide. Details I had once imagined handling with Connor, years from now, gray-haired and hand in hand. Not like this. Not with Harper waiting outside in the lobby, like a shadow pressed against the glass. She should be included, Sylvia said suddenly, her voice flat, decisive. I blinked. Included? Who? Sylvia's gaze sharpened. Harper. The name dropped like a stone. She is not family, I snapped, my voice rising before I could stop it. She's carrying his child, Sylvia countered, her eyes narrowing. That makes her family. She belongs in the front row with us. I laughed bitterly, a sound too sharp to be mistaken for humor. Front row? You want me to sit beside the woman who destroyed my marriage? Who spat on every year I gave your son? You're being petty, Sylvia hissed. Petty? My voice cracked. I am grieving a man who lied to me for 8 years while you embrace the woman who helped him do it. Mason finally lifted his eyes, weary and bloodshot. Enough, he murmured. Connor made mistakes, but the service should be done right. Adrienne deserves that. His words cut deeper than Sylvia's venom. He still called it a mistake, as if betrayal, deceit, and a secret life could be folded neatly into a single word. In the end, I gave in, not for Sylvia, not for Harper, but for Mason. He looked at me with something like pity, and I couldn't bear to add more weight to his sorrow. The day of the funeral dawned gray, the kind of sky that seemed to mourn with you. The chapel filled quickly, polished shoes echoing against marble floors, murmurs rippling through the crowd like a tide. Connor's casket stood at the front, draped in white lilies, surrounded by people who would never know the truth of who he was. I stood beside it, numb in black, the words of my eulogy folded tightly in my hands. My body moved, but my mind floated above, detached. And then she arrived. Harper. Dressed like a senator's widow, fitted black dress, pearls, soft waves cascading over her shoulders, the same designer handbag slung across her arm. Her heels clicked with a rhythm too confident for grief. She looked radiant, luminous even, as though this were her moment, her stage. People turned, heads craned, whispers spread like fire. Sylvia stood immediately, sweeping across the aisle with the grace of a hostess, greeting a guest of honor. This is Harper, she announced proudly to anyone within earshot. She's family now. She's carrying my grandchild. My stomach clenched. Gasps rippled through the pews. My own parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My sister-in-law lowered her eyes, her face pale. No one had been told who this woman was, but they understood enough. I pressed my spine straighter and walked to the lectern. The microphone squealed faintly before settling. I unfolded my paper and began to read. My voice was steady, stronger than I felt. I spoke of Connor's laughter, of his ambition, of the man I had once known before shadows swallowed him whole. I kept my head high, refusing to glance toward Harper. When I finished, silence filled the chapel. For one fragile moment, I believed I had preserved something. Dignity, grace. But then came the reception. In the adjoining hall, people clustered around tables of coffee and cookies, murmuring condolences like scripted lines. I stood near the refreshments, smiling politely, answering questions I didn't hear. And then Harper's voice rose, slicing through the murmur. She deserved it, she said lightly, laughter laced with cruelty. My head snapped toward her. She was speaking to 2 women I didn't recognize, tossing her hair like a debutante. 8 years and nothing, Harper continued, her smile smug. No kids, no spark. She was just a placeholder. Connor needed more. The blood drained from my face. She leaned in, lowering her voice only slightly. Maybe if she wasn't such a barren little failure, none of this would have happened. The room went still. Forks clattered onto plates. The murmur died, like a flame snuffed out. I froze, words clawing at my throat but refusing to form. And then Sylvia appeared beside her, laying a hand on Harper's shoulder with grotesque tenderness. You had 8 years, Adrienne, she said loudly, her eyes locking on mine. And nothing. Maybe Connor just needed a real woman. Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the floor. The crowd buzzed, eyes swinging between us. My knees buckled. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in front of everyone. I opened my mouth, desperate to speak, but air refused to come. My vision blurred. And then, a voice, steady, deep, cutting through the chaos like a blade. I think it's time someone told the truth about Harper Vance. All heads turned. Standing in the doorway was Dylan, my brother, a man whose presence always steadied me, whose silence carried more weight than Sylvia's screams. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on Harper, and for the first time that day, a flicker of something like hope sparked inside me. The room fell deathly silent. Harper's smile faltered. Dylan stepped forward, calm and deliberate, his gaze never leaving her face. And in that moment, I knew the funeral wasn't the end of my nightmare. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The room stilled the moment Dylan spoke. His voice was low, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. He stepped forward, his shoes echoing against the polished floor, and for the first time that day I felt the atmosphere shift, not toward grief, not toward pity, but toward confrontation. Harper stiffened, her hands curling against her designer bag. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her earlier bravado cracking. Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Dylan replied, his eyes narrowing. He stopped just a few feet away from her, shoulders squared, presence radiating the authority he had once carried as a police officer. The crowd leaned in. Even Mason lifted his head, his expression grim but attentive. Sylvia's hand slipped slightly from Harper's shoulder, though she didn't move away. I knew I recognized you, Dylan continued, but I couldn't place it at first, so I made a few calls this morning. His voice dropped an octave. Turns out you've been very busy, Harper Vance. Her face drained of color. Don't listen to him, she said quickly, her words tumbling over one another. He doesn't know me. He's confused. No, Dylan said flatly. I'm not confused, but your husband might be. Gasps rippled across the hall. I blinked, my stomach tightening. Husband? Dylan's gaze hardened. His name is Thomas Jameson. TJ, former Army. Moved to Denver 3 years ago. He also happens to be a friend of mine, and he also happens to still be legally married to you. The silence that followed was deafening. People exchanged wide-eyed glances. Someone whispered, married, under their breath, the word hissing like poison. Sylvia faltered, her lips parting, eyes darting between Dylan and Harper. That's absurd, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. Harper raised her chin, though her hands trembled. We're separated. It's complicated. No, Dylan snapped, stepping closer. It's not complicated at all. You disappeared with his savings. You never filed for divorce, and then you showed up here pretending to be Connor's fiancé. All eyes were on her now. The grieving widow act had unraveled, leaving only panic. Oh. I loved him, she cried suddenly, voice rising. Connor wanted me. He told me. Connor told you a lot of things, didn't he? Dylan cut her off coldly. But lies don't change facts. You're still legally married, which makes every word you've said here a fraud. I watched her crumble, piece by piece, her polished exterior cracking under the weight of truth. My heart should have broken, but instead I felt something unfamiliar, relief. Before anyone could speak, the back doors slammed open. The man who entered moved with purpose, his boots striking the floor like thunder. Tall, broad-shouldered, his leather jacket worn, his face etched with fury. His presence filled the room instantly. Harper, he barked. She flinched like she'd been slapped. The crowd parted instinctively as he strode forward, eyes burning holes into the woman cowering before him. Who is this? Sylvia whispered, her voice trembling now. Dylan answered, his tone sharp. This is TJ, her husband. A collective murmur swept through the hall. I clutched the edge of a table, my knees weak. TJ stopped a few feet from Harper, his voice a low growl. What the hell are you wearing? Whose funeral is this? What lies are you spinning now? TJ, she gasped, her hands outstretched. Please, I can explain. No, he snapped, pulling his phone from his jacket. He tapped the screen and held it up. A recording played, the sound grainy but unmistakable. It was Harper's voice. I faked the pregnancy, the recording said, breathless, conspiratorial. I just wanted a slice of his money. His family's loaded. Once he's gone, I'll say the baby's his. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. The room erupted. A woman in the back gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. Mason buried his face in his hands. Sylvia staggered into a chair, her body trembling. You lied? She whispered hoarsely. You lied about being pregnant? Harper's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. I didn't mean... I stepped forward then, my voice shaking but firm. You tried to bury me at my husband's funeral. You tried to erase me with lies. TJ slammed a folded document onto the condolence table. Divorce papers, already signed by me. All that's missing is your signature, and we've got plenty of witnesses. People surged forward, eager to see. Harper's hands shook as the pen was thrust into her grip. Her glamour unraveled with every stroke of ink. When she finally signed, the crowd exhaled collectively. She looked up, eyes wild, searching for an ally. None came. Not even Sylvia moved to defend her. She bolted toward the doors, heels clattering, but Dylan stepped in her path, his expression ice. You stole from a veteran, he said, his voice low but deadly. And you committed fraud across state lines. You think you're walking out of here? He reached into his jacket and pulled out his old badge. Expired, but real. I made more calls this morning, he added. You'll be getting visitors soon. Harper's breath hitched. The hall held its collective breath. And then, for the first time since Connor's death, I saw justice inch closer. The silence after Dylan's words was almost unbearable, stretched so thin I thought it might snap. Harper stood frozen, her perfect hair falling across her face, mascara streaks trailing down her cheeks like ink bleeding through paper. No, she whispered finally, voice trembling. This isn't what you think. Connor loved me. He wanted me. Enough! TJ's voice thundered across the room. He jabbed a finger toward her like an executioner delivering the verdict. You conned him, just like you conned me, and you'd still be bleeding him dry if he were alive. The recording replayed in my head, every syllable carving deeper. I faked the pregnancy. I just wanted a slice of his money. People began murmuring again, but this time there was no sympathy in their tone, only disgust. She lied about being pregnant, someone hissed. Fraud, another muttered. She used him, a third said, shaking their head. Harper's breathing turned frantic, ragged. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for Sylvia. Say something, she begged. Tell them I was good for him. But Sylvia just stared at her, pale and trembling. Her lips moved, but only one phrase slipped out, quiet and broken. I was wrong. It was the first time I had ever heard her admit it, and it didn't bring me satisfaction, only a hollow ache. Harper stumbled back, knocking into a chair. You all hate me because he chose me over her. She jabbed a finger toward me, her voice rising, shrill. Because I could give him what she couldn't. The words landed like acid. For years, I had heard whispers of my failure, my body's betrayal. Now she wielded it like a weapon, even as her lies collapsed around her. But no one rallied to her side, not even Mason, who finally stood, his face lined with exhaustion. Get out, he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout. Harper's mouth fell open. What? You heard me. He pointed toward the doors. Leave this place. You've shamed my son's memory enough. Tears pooled in her eyes, but they no longer inspired sympathy. They looked staged, desperate. Connor wanted me, she said again, weaker now, her voice cracking. Connor's gone, Mason replied, and all that's left is the wreckage. The finality of his tone sealed her fate. Dylan shifted, stepping aside, but only far enough to allow her exit under his watchful eye. Police will be in touch, he said coldly. For a moment, Harper looked like she might argue, claw her way back into control, but then the weight of the stares, the whispers, the unveiled disgust crushed her resolve. She turned and bolted, heels clattering like gunshots down the hall, her designer bag swinging wildly at her side. The doors slammed behind her. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. I stood still, my breath shallow, my body trembling as though I had run miles without rest. The funeral reception had devolved into a courtroom, and the verdict had finally been delivered. Sylvia remained seated, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her face was blank, almost waxen, as though she had been hollowed out. I expected rage, denial, some final attempt to cast me as the villain. Instead, she whispered, barely audible, I was wrong about everything. The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. No one rushed to comfort her. Mason sat beside her silently, his head bowed. Dylan lingered nearby, his gaze protective, steady. And me, I simply stood there, not triumphant, not relieved, but emptied. Because Harper's lies had been exposed, because Sylvia's cruelty had cracked. But Connor was still gone. My marriage still lay in ruins, and no amount of truth could bring back the years I had lost. Later, as the crowd thinned and people left in hushed clusters, Mason approached me. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his frame bent under invisible weight. I'm sorry, Adrienne, he said quietly. His hand, warm and heavy, rested briefly on my shoulder. You didn't deserve this. No, I whispered, but I survived it. And that meant more than victory. In the days that followed, whispers spread quickly through town. About the widow who wasn't a widow. About the mistress unmasked. About the matriarch who had been humbled in front of her empire. Sylvia withdrew, rarely leaving her house. Mason kept his head down, his once booming presence reduced to a quiet shadow. As for me, I found myself breathing easier. The storm had passed, leaving silence in its wake. a silence that was mine. I sorted through the wreckage of my life slowly, piece by piece, clearing Connor's closet, closing accounts, returning keys. Every action felt like peeling away a layer of suffocation. Some nights I still woke in tears, dreams of what could have been still clawing at me. But when the sun rose, I faced it with a new kind of resolve. Because in the end, Harper hadn't destroyed me. Sylvia hadn't erased me. Connor hadn't defined me. I was still here, alive. And survival, I realized, was its own quiet kind of triumph. Weeks passed, though time felt different now. Uneven, unpredictable. Some days stretched endlessly, each hour dragging behind it the weight of grief and betrayal. Other days passed in a blink, the calendar leaping forward while I remained anchored in the same hollow ache. The chaos faded, slowly. The whispers dulled. Harper was gone, her name now spoken only in scandalized tones. Sylvia vanished into her home, blinds drawn, the once fearsome matriarch reduced to a silhouette behind curtains. Mason called once or twice, his voice subdued, apologetic, as if trying to atone for sins that were not entirely his. Dylan checked in more often, grounding me with his steady presence. And me? I returned to routines, though nothing felt routine anymore. I went back to work, the spreadsheets and reports both comforting and numbing. I cleaned the house room by room, as though scrubbing Connor's shadow out of every corner. I slept alone in the bed that used to hold two, waking sometimes to reach across the sheets before remembering there was no one there. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to sit in silence. No performance, no pretending, just me and the echo of my own breath. One morning, while washing dishes, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. My face was thinner, my eyes ringed with fatigue, but something else lingered there, a spark. Not triumph, not yet, but resilience, a stubborn refusal to collapse completely. Still, my body betrayed me. I started waking nauseous, unable to finish my morning coffee. My appetite shifted, cravings striking at odd hours. At first, I blamed stress, the aftermath of too many sleepless nights. But when it persisted, I couldn't ignore it. I drove to the pharmacy one evening, the fluorescent lights harsh and clinical. I grabbed a box, tucked it into my bag like contraband, and hurried home. The bathroom mirror watched as I tore it open, my hands trembling. I told myself it was impossible. Years of failure had taught me this ritual always ended in disappointment. Negative, always negative. But when I set the stick down and saw the faint pink lines, two, clear as sunrise, I nearly collapsed. 2 lines. Pregnant. The word ricocheted in my chest, impossible yet undeniable. I sat on the edge of the tub, gripping the sink for balance. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't the sharp tears of grief. They were something else, something fragile. I went to the doctor the next morning, needing more than plastic to confirm it. Blood test, numbers, a kind smile. "Congratulations, Adrienne," she said softly. "You're pregnant." The world outside the clinic seemed brighter, sharper, the air crisp against my skin, the sunlight almost too much to bear. I walked to my car in a daze, one hand pressed to my stomach as though cradling the secret already. For years, I had been told my body had failed me, that I had failed Connor, failed Sylvia, failed the family name. But here, now, in the wake of loss and betrayal, my body whispered otherwise. This life was mine. Not Sylvia's, not Harper's, not Connor's. Mine. That evening, I sat in the driveway before going inside. The house loomed quiet, heavy with memories, but for the first time, I didn't feel swallowed by them. I felt something else, possibility. I whispered into the stillness, my hand still on my stomach. "You're my second chance." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't closure, it wasn't even joy, not yet. It was something raw. A promise to myself that I would not let this child grow up in the shadow of lies, manipulation, or cruelty. Later, I stood in the living room, staring at the mantel. The wedding photo was still there, framed in polished silver. Connor and me, young and smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. I picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then set it gently into a box. That chapter was over. I wasn't naive. I knew the road ahead would be hard. Single motherhood wasn't a dream I had written for myself, but it was real, it was honest, and it was mine to claim. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled. Because after all the pain, after the betrayal, the humiliation, the death, the lies, something remained. Not Connor, not Harper, not Sylvia's obsession with legacy. A heartbeat. My child. And me. Together we would begin again.